Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Today, we're continuing on with our Meet the Lawyer Bencher candidates profiles. And as always, the views and opinions are of the candidates alone. They don't reflect me, Justice and Pieces, Trias College, any of the other education institutions or organizations I'm a board member of. And wrap up kind of our first weekend here, we have Mark joining us. First of all, thank you, Mark, for joining us. Perhaps you can start by telling us a bit about yourself, and thanks again for taking the time to speak with us.
Well, I'll start by thanking you, JP, for doing this. It sounds like a lot of work, but it's an important thing you're doing to give the voters in the upcoming election a chance to hear from hopefully most, if not all, of the candidates. So my name is Mark Surchin. I'm a 1983 call. So I'm coming up on 40 years of practice. As you can probably see from the background behind me, my childhood loyalties were east of Ontario. I grew up in Montreal, but I've been in Toronto since 1978, and I practice business law, which means really I do transactional work, helping clients buy and sell businesses, and in the debt finance area, acting for both lenders and borrowers. For the last many years, I've spent quite a bit of time outside of my practice on governance matters. So I am on the governing board of a university where I chair its governance committee. I do work with University of Toronto in that area as well. And I teach business organizations at the Faculty of Law at U of T, primarily to foreign trained lawyers who are doing a global professional master's program as a means to become licensed in Ontario. So when this coalition started to come together, and I was asked if it interested me to run for bencher as part of this group, I jumped at the opportunity to put my governance expertise, such as it is, into action for the benefit of the legal profession. So that's a bit about me.
Yeah, so I guess that kind of maybe follow up on that is, why are you running, after 40 years of practice, what gave you the call that I want to be a bencher now, and accepting sort of that connection there as part of the Good Governance Coalition?
So there's kind of a two-layered answer to that. One is personal, one's a little more intellectual. On the personal side, I have had experiences along the way in my life that dovetailed with my career dealing with medical events, and people who go through events of some seriousness often reassess how they want to spend their time. And that definitely has been true in my case. I'm completely fine now, but going back 20 plus years ago, when I first had that sort of significant experience, I made a decision that I wanted my career to not be the be all and end all of my life, and to devote some of my talents, such as they are, to the community. And I've done that really pretty continuously for the last couple of decades. So this is part of that. But in terms of this particular role, should I be privileged to be elected as a bencher, I've spent my 4 decades in practice in a particular career as a lawyer in Ontario. And I think we're at a crossroads in terms of how the legal professions, lawyers and paralegals, are governed, and whether self-regulation will continue. And I think I'm the sort of person who has something to offer in terms of some of my skills, some of my knowledge, and just being someone who's a worker bee on boards, who's the consensus builder, and contributes to getting things done in that sort of environment. So it's not something I've been dying to do my whole career. Given what's gone on the last 4 years and the opportunity that came my way, it felt like something that I should do, that I was obligated to do, bearing in mind as well that Eddie Goodman, for whom my firm is named, was a bencher. And it feels like a good bookend for me personally, to contribute to the profession in that way, should I be elected.
Now, with this election, certainly there's the vision there of the Good Governance Coalition, but for yourself, I mean, there may be things that you'd like to see as, if elected as bencher. So maybe you can kind of highlight some of the things now that have had you, respond to that call there and saying, if I am elected, here are the things that I'd like to see done at the Law Society in terms of, as you mentioned, the last 4 years doing it differently.
Okay, so my answer on this might be a bit different than some of the answers you've already heard or will continue to hear. I feel pretty strongly that the role of a board member is nothing remotely political. So I feel strongly that I should not be offering up a bunch of campaign promises by way of policy, because in my mind, the role of a bencher, like that of any board member, is twofold. One, to act honestly in a good faith with the view to the best interests of the organization, which in the case of the Law Society is the public interest. And the other is to adhere to a standard of care, to show up, to be prepared for meetings, do one's diligence, contribute to the discussion, keep it civil, and make sure, however one casts one's vote, that it's an informed vote. So part of me thinks I don't know enough about all the issues facing the Law Society to say with any precision, I'm going to vote this way or that way on any number of issues. So I would say part of what I'd like to contribute to is a return to good process, to civility, to benchers listening to each other, to benchers listening to professional management and being respectful of all the work they've done, even if the benchers have the final say when it comes to policy, matters of strategy, and making the ultimate voting decisions. In terms, what I can say about substance is there are a lot of issues facing the Law Society around funding, around how libraries in the various counties are funded, around cutting edge issues coming our way, such as artificial intelligence, and how does the regulatory framework address that, around articling and the number of students who complete all the prerequisites but are unable to secure an articling position and therefore can't become licensed, and about internationally trained lawyers, many of whom have a lot to contribute to the professions here in Ontario, but have a very hard time getting on stream. So those are the things that come to mind, but I'm not a bencher now and haven't been one. So, I could well have missed something, but I think the most important thing is to approach all of the things within the mandate of the Law Society with an open mind and without a political lens. And if I may, it strikes me that the full stop slate, which says the Good Governance Coalition side is political, is itself, to me anyway, the side that is bringing politics to board governance. And in my mind, they don't mix. So if there's one thing I'd like to see happen over the next 4 years, it's to decouple politics from good governance.
Now you bring that up, and I guess part of the sort of the reason, I mean, where the Good Governance Coalition comes about is in response to the then stop now full stop slate, and then it kind of creates this, well, we didn't like that they came together with this slate, so we're going to come with our slate, and then if we're elected, we're going to get rid of slates altogether. That kind of doesn't really make sense for some people, right? How do you kind of reconcile? And then you're saying, look, we don't need politics to mix in here, and I'm not going to have policy because, again, it's in the interest of the public. But how do you kind of connect all of these dots and say, here's what's going to happen?
That's a very fair question. My answer would be the only thing worse than a two-party system is a one-party system. And 4 years ago, you had one group animated by their opposition to the statement of principles who came together, and all the voters who agreed with their view on that voted for them exclusively, pretty much, as a bloc. And for those who felt differently, there was no organized group. Instead, there were, I don't know, 100 individuals, each vying for votes. So I think our coalition has come together pretty much tactically to make sure splitting doesn't happen again. But I would agree with anyone who says party politics and board governance do not go together. I think I would like to reassure voters that the coalition, once it's formed, if we secure a majority, it will basically cease to exist. We haven't agreed on how we'll vote. There will not be whipping of votes. We'll be free agents. And I think part of our promise to the voting electorate is we will take a look at whether there should be electoral reform for how benchers are chosen and not allow slates to be part of it in the future. Bear in mind that the ballots people will have to mark their choices will just have individual names. It's not like voting in an election, provincially or federally, where there's party designations, I think, on the ballot. That won't be the case here. So if people are motivated to vote for an independent or a member of the coalition I'm part of or the full stop team, they'll have had to have done their homework and figure out, who's who in order to do that. But I just think board governance is fundamentally different than a political role. The boardroom is not the legislature. And so I hear you and agree with the premise of the question that there's something off about slates in this sort of election. But I hope it's a one-time tactical thing that's really driven by what happened last time, which was one party and then 100 people's having their votes split.
All right. So on that, then, in terms of some of the positions there of the full stop, I mean, without really going too in depth, I mean, on their website, it's stop creep, stop bloat, stop woke. I don't know the exact order, but those three are there. And so what's the danger then if they're elected and under these, these issues that they're saying, look, well, over-regulation or bloat in terms of overspending, right? I mean, I know some people point to, bar associations, or sorry, the bars in the U.S. where the fees are like fractions of what we're paying. So what would you say kind of in response to, well, this is what they're taking and why that might be problematic to self-regulation itself if they were given a majority of the seats?
So the first thought would be the duties of the benchers are to the public. They're not to the bar or to the paralegals. We're not a trade or association. We're not the bar association. We are the Outlaw Society is a regulatory body, and the legislature, in its wisdom, has said in the Law Society Act that X number of the benchers will be made up of lawyers and paralegals. They didn't have to do that. They could have they could set up a regime where the government appoints the people who serve as benchers. So I think that is at stake if it becomes too political. Their view seems to be that the mandate of the Law Society is extremely narrow. And there is a statutory mandate. Reasonable people can disagree as to what it is or how broad it is, but I respectfully take the view that the way they articulate it is much too narrow. When you look at the Law Society Act, it talks about the public interest. It talks about access to justice. It doesn't just say the goal of the Law Society is to figure out who to be licensed as a lawyer or paralegal and how to ensure the maintenance of professional competence. It's not that narrow. All these other things are in there. So the Law Society and its governing body have to figure out how far that goes. So I believe they define it too narrowly. I believe they're trying to link it to a bunch of divisive, populist, political stuff that's out there in society at large in our current era, especially south of the border. They're trying to rile up voters over those issues. They also talk about us being not just the good governance coalition, but the more governance coalition. And I kind of feel I was a US politics major way back in the day. I feel like it's Ronald Reagan making comments about his Democratic opponent in the 80s. It just has nothing to do with board governance. Uh, so I think um, we will try to return things to thoughtful, civil debate where we stick to the statutory mandates. We just disagree, these two groups, as to what that mandate is. They say it's very narrow, and they accuse us of broadening it into all these things that get into social engineering. I don't think that's the case. And I think they're trying to make us about that because it's harder for them otherwise to defend what they're about. So they want to portray us as a group that wants to bring back the statement of principles, when it's very clear from our website that none of our coalition members is for that. The statement of principles had its moment. It's been repealed. It's dead. We're not bringing it back. That doesn't mean the Law Society doesn't have a role to play when it comes to equity, diversity, and inclusion. I think it does. That comes from the statutory mandate. But I believe they're fear mongering. And maybe one other thing I'll say on that is what I've said to some of their candidates on Twitter. In particular, my firm, Goodman's, was formed decades ago in part because Jewish licensees could not get positions at what I'll say were mainstream firms. And the Law Society of Upper Canada, as it then was in the day, it didn't do anything about that. So the question I've asked to some of our friends on the other side is, was that okay? Was it okay for the regulator to stand idly by when there was rampant discrimination? They don't want to answer that question, because if they answer it with a yes, then they open up the door to the same sort of thing being true today. So the sort of answer they give is, some people then did racist things, but your side is trying to portray the legal profession and society as a whole as bad. And you're doing the social engineering. So having said, I want to talk about pure board governance and not get into politics. I've gone off on a bit of a riff about that, because that's where I think they want to take us. And that's not where I want to go. I just want to be like a normal, thoughtful governing board of a regulator that's meant to regulate for the benefit of the public interest and keep politics out of it.
And so in terms of you have the experience there, you mentioned at a university. So what kind of what should it be looking like then in terms of governance or good governance of how the board members, the benchers should be sort of focused on in terms of the public interest at large?
So let's take one important matter, which is the budget. The Law Society is a fairly big enterprise now. Its budget is not small. So you could take the view that it's too big, we should just slash by 25%, which I believe is what some of the current benchers on that side have said. But what I think is appropriate for a bencher is to let professional people who work for the Law Society come up with a budget that they think makes sense to carry out the Law Society's statutory mandate, to work on it thoughtfully and carefully over many months at the committee level with a bunch of benchers of all stripes, have that committee, after the budget goes through a number of drafts, make a recommendation to all the benchers at convocation that our committee, having done the deep dive and all the diligence about the budget, we recommend that it be passed. And then the full group of benchers reads it, thinks about it, asks questions, in particular around the priorities. It looks like our top 3 line items are X, Y, and Z. Do those align with what the top priorities are of the organization, which we serve as benchers? So that's, to me, how it should work. So I think benchers stick to strategy, mission, oversight, and they give a fair bit of latitude to the professional management to deal with day-to-day operations, which isn't to say the benchers run away from policy at all. It's just no bencher can spend all their time and attention getting into the weeds on everything. So it's a mission critical role of strategy and oversight and priorities. And different benchers will have different views on those things. That's to be expected, that's normal, but that should be hammered out civilly and collaboratively, and the chips will fall where they may. But I think going through that process with diligence, in good faith and open minds is how well-governed organizations have their boards function.
And Mark, last couple of questions here. I have a number of students that may be listening and getting into the profession. I was wondering if you have any words of wisdom for them as they look to become licensed and practicing one day.
I would say it's a long road, getting into law school, going to law school, articling, passing the bar, and then getting into practice. But I would say it's well worth it. It's an extremely rewarding career that I felt privileged to have had. I think when I look back now on what I already said was 40 years of practice, I don't think of, which deal I worked on, it was a lot of money or high profile. It always, for me, comes down to the people. How did I feel at the end of the deal? Was the client happy? Did the lawyers who did the work together, even on different sides of the transaction, feel good at the end that they did their best for the clients, and it was civil, and we'd look forward to working together again. I think also law students should understand the work we do is really important in the community. I haven't worked in an area where I felt like, I'm helping small business or people dealing with their individual problems solve those problems. I've been dealing not always with big business, but more, sizable businesses. But at the end of the day, your clients are people, and they come to you with trust for you to help them solve their problems. Sometimes with a great deal of fear that things are going to unravel for them personally or financially. So it's a real privilege to be able to do that for clients. I would also say, I have special regard for internationally trained lawyers who've come here in the hopes of getting licensed. I've taught a fair number of them over the last 5 years and helped some of them navigate the system to the point where they're now lawyers. I think the regulator needs to take another look at how those very high quality professionals can come on stream in our province, where we still have a need for people with their skill sets and experiences. So I say that with an open mind. I don't know enough about how the regulation works today, but to students, I would say it's a long road, but the destination at the end is worth the long road.
Perfect. And Mark, final question here. Why should, no, I'm a lawyer, I get to vote. So why should I, or why should any of the lawyers listening vote for you and vote for the Good Governance Coalition? And thanks again for taking the time and joining us.
Sure, I will happily answer that. And thank you, JP, for doing this. I think if you vote for the group that I am part of, you can feel confident that we are a group of competent leaders of the profession, a very diverse group in every way, big firms, small firms, all over the province, all sorts of practice areas. I'm one of the few commercial lawyers. They actually call me a solicitor, which I'm not used to being called. But we feel we're representative of the profession as a whole, and we will approach the issues before our regulator thoughtfully, with civility, careful deliberation, and ensure that stewardship of the governing board of the Law Society, our regulator, is in good hands. We'll try to keep politics out of it, but in so doing, we are not ourselves going to be political and try and do all the social engineering that the Full Stop folks say we want to do. We just want to be a normal board that does the work of the board of a regulator. That's the role of a bencher. That's what we're committed to do if we're elected.
Perfect. So once again, thanks for joining us, Mark, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. We'll continue again throughout the rest of the month and next month as we get to the voting day. Take care, everyone.
Okay, thanks so much.